Now, going all the way back to the fall of communism in 1990 and 1991, and reinforced by the events of September 11th, 2001, the focus of American foreign policy has shifted certainly from the communist world to another world. It's called the Muslim world. And this Muslim world of 1,500,000,000 people is a very provocative world for us, because it contains within it the Muslim fundamentalists who are responsible for the majority today of world terrorism. And we are theoretically engaged in a war against terrorism. So now we have this focus on the Muslim world. And our information about the Muslim world is limited. It's not like the information we had over 50 years about the communist world. The Muslim world is divided up into 5 great cultural regions, each one dominated by a language or a series of related languages, each of which containing people who are ethnically connected. The first is the Arab world, containing some 200 million people. And then there is the Persian world, and the languages related to Persian. There's Iran, there's Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Pakistan, whatever. There is that region. The third region is the Turkish region, which includes not only Turkey, but the homeland of the Turks, which is in Central Asia, and which includes countries that used to belong to the Soviet Union, called Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and even nations that are locked up in Russia itself still. Right on the Volga, not too far from Moscow, there's a city called Kazan. Kazan is the capital of an autonomous republic within Russia called Tatarstan or Tatarstan. The Tartars, you've heard of the Tartars, related to the Mongols, related to the Turks. So even the Chechens in the Caucasus, all right, all part of that Turkish or Turkish-related world. Well, that's the third region. And then there is a fourth region. Way over here in Southeast Asia, there lives a people called the Malays. The Malays include the Filipinos, the Indonesians, the Malaysians, whatever. They have a shared race, shared ethnicity, and shared languages. The majority of these people have been converted to Islam. And in fact, the largest Muslim country in the world is today Indonesia. They were converted very late, not until the 15th and 16th and 17th centuries, but there they are. And then there's the African world. South of the Sahara, that is south of the Arab part of Africa, there are millions and millions of black Africans who are Muslims. They live in places like Mali, Niger, Senegal, Nigeria, the Ivory Coast, whatever it be. I mean, they're there. And they all add up to 1,500,000,000 people. Pretty impressive, right? Can't be ignored, especially if a large part of the population is hostile to the United States of America. Now, at the heart of the Muslim world is the oldest Muslim part. It's the part where Islam began and then spread to all the other regions. That is the Arab nation. The Arab nation consists of approximately 200 million people today. And in fact, in the Arab nation, there are about 22 states. Let me mention some of them. and divided up into regions. So let me talk about the regions. And I'll start from the west going to the east. There is what we call the Maghreb or the West. The word Moor is related to it. Arabs who come from this area, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco, are called Moors. Othello, theoretically, all right, came from this area, and they have a distinct culture and a distinct way of speaking Arabic. Written Arabic is uniform, but the way Arabic is spoken varies from region to region in the same way that English varies from region to region, and in some cases, just as often Cockney English or Mississippi English is incomprehensible to us, right? So somebody from Fez may be speaking Arabic and somebody from Baghdad won't understand him. It's the same language, it's just a different dialect, a different way of speaking. The second region is what we call the Egyptian region. That includes two countries. Egypt itself, which is the most populous of the Arab nations. And when I say the most populous, you have to realize that Egypt looks fairly big on the map. It's very small because 95% of it is desert. Everybody is squeezed into a little section along the Nile River. Because you can't live, I mean, if you have the money that many people now have in Arizona, you can live anywhere. Do you understand? You can build yourself an igloo, a heated igloo in the Arctic, and you can build yourself a home with a huge lawn in Arizona. But if you're not at that level, then obviously you can't live in the desert in the same way. And so there's this all squeezed along the Nile. South of Egypt is a country called the Sudan, which at one time was attached to Egypt and is now separate. But culturally, they are related, and that's the Egyptian region. That's region number 2. Region number 3 is what we call the Fertile Crescent, which includes Jordan and Lebanon and Syria and Iraq. They are connected. The area of Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan for a long time was called the Levant, L-E-V-A-N-T, and so the people who came from there were called Levantine Arabs. But that's a region all its own. The last region is really the first region. It's what is called Arabia, and which today contains a series of countries. The overwhelming majority of Arabia is controlled by a family called the Saudis. Now, they've taken most of Arabia, including its most famous city, Mecca, belongs to it, and including incredible oil reserves. When America made the first alliance with Saudi Arabia contained, it was believed, over 1/4 of the world's petroleum resources. That's no longer true, but it was true when the alliance was made. In addition, there are other countries that you may know about or not know about. There's a little island kingdom off the coast of Arabia called Bahrain. There's a little peninsula, quite rich, with a lot of oil, called Qatar. It's become very famous because the radio station that seems to infuriate Americans, that now, and the TV station that is broadcast over a large part of the Arab world, Al Jazeera, it keeps featuring messages from Osama bin Laden to the world, is in Qatar. And then next to Qatar is a federation of Arab states that weren't swallowed up by Saudi Arabia. They had been under British control in the same way that Qatar was and Bahrain was. And they're called the United Arab Emirates. And the most famous of the little states, there are 7 states. The most famous of them is Abu Dhabi, which has a very, very plush and luxurious capital, which tourists often stop by to see. It's safer to go there than it is to go to Saudi Arabia. And then around the corner is Oman, the capital of which features a name that you should know because it applies to fruit, Muscat, all right? So it doesn't have a lot of oil, but it has strategic value. And then finally, and very important, Saudi Arabia has 27 million people or 28 million people. But Yemen has close to 19 million people. So its size is much smaller. But the part of Arabia that was always most fertile, that could sustain the greatest number of people, was in Yemen. All right? I mean, Saudi Arabia looks big, but I want to tell you that most of it is impossible desert. And just north of Yemen is this desert that nothing can survive. Even camels get sick when they think of crossing it. So just looking at it and say, oh, it's so big, that doesn't make any difference. What part of it is usable from the human perspective, all right? And so Yemen down here, it's a famous place historically. In biblical times, it was well known. A very famous queen came from there. The name of the country was Sheba, or in Arabic, Saba. It wasn't called Yemen. Yemen means the south, but it was called Sheba, and the Queen of Sheba, who was extremely wealthy, her annual income certainly was greater than King Solomon's. Okay, lived down there. So when we speak of Arabia, it's more than Saudi Arabia. It's Saudi Arabia plus these other countries, Arab countries, that are part of Arabia. But this is the homeland. Do you understand? This is where the Arab nation began. This is where Islam began. So that's why I'm starting with it. I'm starting with that first for the understanding of the Arab nation. Now, the Arab nation has many problems, and I refer to it as a nation. It's divided up into many states, theoretically 22. But the Arab world views itself as a nation. If you ask Iraqis, what are they? Well, they may say Iraqi, but they will identify themselves as Arabs, right? Members of the Arab nation. And if you speak to somebody in Morocco, they may say they're Moroccan, but Moroccan is something like geographic. Their ethnic group is Arab. So, see, the big issue is, what would the Arab nation be if it were all united? 200 million people controlling some of the most valuable real estate and resources in the world. Let's try to imagine. If somebody could paste it together, Mr. Nasser tried to paste it together, but he failed. He made a good try at it, and then in 1967, the Six-Day War ended his power. But that has been the dream. The dream of the leaders of the Arab nation and of most people in the Arab nation is to be united, to feel their power again, because at one time the Arab nation was a very powerful nation. They went out to conquer the largest land empire the world had ever known in the 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries. And in fact, many of the countries which now are Arabic spoke other languages. The Arabs came there, and the people gave up speaking Egyptian. They gave up speaking Syrian or Aramaic. They gave up speaking all those languages, and now they speak Arabic. So that, by the way, is the theme that runs through the story of the Arabs. At one time they were united and they were powerful. Today they are divided and they are weak, all right? So that's the... And obviously there are people in the world who want them to remain divided, because a strong Arab nation is regarded by many people, including the Israelis, as provocative. They want a weak Arab nation, because if all the Arab states were united into one nation, most likely Israel would not exist. One of the problems is that despite all the oil wealth generated in the Arab world, the Arab world is overwhelmingly poor. If I go to Morocco, poor. If I go to Algeria, poor. Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, doesn't make any difference. Even if I go to countries that have access to oil, like Iraq, the present condition of Iraq is for sure what? Poor. And in Saudi Arabia, where the standard of living has been raised overwhelmingly, there are still fairly substantial elements of the population that are poor. So there's all this poverty, which is related to the issue of the economy. In order to become rich, you have to have an urban industrial civilization. That's it. If you don't have an urban industrial civilization, forget it. With agriculture, you're not going to do it. So in order to have an urban industrial civilization, you have to enter the scientific age. In order to enter the scientific age, you need a large part of your population devoted to science education. Oh. That is not true in the Arab world. Very interesting. Japan certainly wasn't a Western country. But a huge number of people in Japan are devoting themselves to, now, right, to an education that began in Western Europe. It's called science education. They're not running around studying Buddhism. They're running around trying to get into universities, to get into chemistry departments, to understand physics departments, and whatever else it is. If that were true in the Arab world, then the story of the Arabs would be different. If people get higher education in the Arab world, there are two professions they prefer: the clergy and lawyers. In poor countries, you'll find this to be true. It's one of the reasons why they remain poor. Instead of choosing physics or chemistry or engineering, they choose law. And this is no attempt to diminish the importance of lawyers, in our culture. All right. Good. One of the problems, of course, is religion. In order for an urban industrial civilization to succeed, people have to become less religious. All right. It is not true that you can have an advanced urban industrial civilization where people are intensely religious. By less religious, I mean, I belong to a church, I belong to a synagogue, I go there every so often. Most of my time is spent pursuing secular education. I mean, we all understand what that means. That's the American pattern. So, the Muslim world and the Arab world is intensely religious. People spend enormous amounts of time during the day engaging in religious activity. You can only imagine how disrupting it would be at General Motors if 5 times a day all the executives. No, I'm just trying to give you the scene. in the executive dining room are pulling out their rugs. I mean, we live a secular schedule into which religious events are fit. In the Arab world, they live a religious schedule into which secular events are. It's an entirely different kind of lifestyle. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't areas of the Arab world that are secularized. They are. But I'm talking about the overwhelming majority of the people in the culture. One of the main problems, obviously, is an obsession with a political issue, which serves as a way of uniting all Arabs, but has not succeeded in enabling them to unite politically. It's the obsession with Israel and with Zionism. It's the major issue in the Arab world. It is the symbol of humiliation by people, by Europeans, by European Jews who have come and taken their land, and now, in order to restore Arab pride, which is essential to Arab dignity, that territory must be recovered. One of the challenges now in the Arab world, of course, is terrorism. A good part of the terrorism that takes place in the world today takes place not only in the Muslim world as a whole, but takes place specifically in the Arab section of the Muslim world. And the people who engage in it are, in their minds, revolutionaries. They are out to overthrow what they regard as wicked regimes that have humiliated the Arabs by encouraging them to pursue a policy of westernization which compromises, in quotation marks, the true character of the Arab people and the Arab nation. And the last, to show you their weakness, they've been invaded. An American army, is that true? I mean, first of all, they were conquered. In the 19th and early part of the 20th century, the entire Arab world was conquered. Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, French. Libya, Italian. Egypt and the Sudan, British. Iraq, British. Syria and Lebanon, French. Palestine, British. And the only part of the Arab world that wasn't was Arabia, because initially, before oil was discovered, who wanted it? Well, they succeeded in getting their independence not as a united nation, but as what? A divided nation. And now they're experiencing invasion again. I mean, part of the enormous resistance to the American presence in Iraq, in the Arab world, even from Arabs who hate Muslim fundamentalists, this is a reminder of the what? The humiliation. And so there are, to say the least, overwhelming problems. So let me try to start at the beginning of what I call Arabia. Arabia, from the beginning, as far back as we know in terms of civilization, was a huge desert. We know from geological studies and geographic studies that thousands and thousands of years ago it was fertile, and that its drying up is something comparatively new, but that's irrelevant. It's irrelevant to be told that it was fertile. It doesn't help you, right? It's a desert, an overwhelming desert, which was for most of its history impenetrable, because it wasn't until about 3,000 years ago that an animal showed up that could be used to traverse the desert. It's called the camel. Prior to that time, all that was available was the donkey. If you wanted food, there was only one area in the Arabian Peninsula where you could grow anything, and that was in the south, in Yemen. Otherwise, the only way to survive in that hostile environment was to live the way the Semites in the Bible lived. You got sheep and goats. And later on, you can add camels. Got it? Now, I want to mention that because we call this the pastoral way of life. If in America somebody says, my son is a shepherd, in the 60s it was okay, because they were all going sandals, shepherds. Remember the 60s? That was fine to be out. Oh, of course. My son, the shepherd. I mean, you're calling a psychiatrist. Why would he choose to be a shepherd? Where's he going being a shepherd? But I want to tell you that in the Muslim world, the image of the shepherd life is an image of great prestige. And in fact, you can't understand either the Muslim or the Arab world without understanding the ambivalence that exists in that world. On the one hand, they want to modernize, and sometimes they'll speak disparagingly of the Bedouin. But when they do their religion and turn to their heroes, these are all heroes that come out of shepherd life. And one of the reasons for the power of the fundamentalist movement in the Arab world lies in the fact that there is still deep and abiding respect for the lifestyle of the shepherd, in the same way that we still have in this country a deep and abiding respect for the lifestyle of farmers, even though most of us don't want to become farmers, right? We think they're good people, they're hardworking, they've got good, right? Good morals, right? Raise your kid on a farm, he'll be okay. So the shepherd, there isn't a farmer tradition in the Arab tradition. There's a shepherd tradition, and that's a different kind of tradition, and that tradition was to feature very strong male chauvinism. The only role for women in that shepherd tradition, since they didn't take care of the sheep and the goats, and they didn't fight the wars and the feuding, their major role was to have children in an environment in which most children who were born died early. And women were bought, and one of the characteristics of Bedouin, or the pastoral society, which still exists in Arabia to a much greater extent than it exists in other parts of the Arab world, is female seclusion. Women are purchased, they are secluded, they bear children for their husbands, they socialize with each other, but they do not socialize with men, and they do not appear flamboyantly revealed in public. Because life was very hard on the desert, there were very few cities, and people were divided up into small clans and tribes. The strongest allegiance of people in this Arab world was not the nation. The strongest allegiance of the people in this Arab world, and it still remains true in large parts of Arabia, the strongest allegiance is that of my tribe. People know their tribe. And in fact, one tribe has historically feuded with what? Other tribes. So the political development that occurred in other parts of the ancient world did not take place in Arabia because of the economic situation that existed. So you are a member of your clan, you are a member of your tribe, you have very little sense of what we call individual identity. And in fact, you are prepared to lay down your life for the survival of your tribe. Along the way, going all the way back 2,000 years, Arabia developed. The first thing it developed was trade. The trade was a function of something in Yemen. Today, in order to be clean or smell nice, we wash. In the ancient world, I mean, just removing filth was very hard. So one of the major things for rich people was to kill the stench of the place where they lived. And the way you do that is with perfume. Or something that's perfumey. It's called incense. And the home of the most desirable incense in the world came from the bark of a tree that grew down here in Yemen. Still grows there. And it produced an incredible trade. In Greek and Roman times, it provided for most of the wealth beyond sheep and goats in Arabia, and there was a trade route that started in Sheba. That's why the Queen of Sheba was so rich. She sold frankincense. And there was a road that led all the way up to Gaza. And it was a very, very busy road, and it was along this road that for the first time there appeared cities, trading posts. The trade route was like a railroad, and there were towns. Let me mention two towns along the way that may be familiar to you. One is called Mecca, which was the largest town on that route, and the second town north of Mecca, which was to become the capital of the Arab world. The first capital of the Arab world is called Medina, M-E-D-I-N-A, so there's trade. Along the way, because you had to feed the cities with food, around some of the cities, if there was an oasis, there developed some levels of farming, but farming never achieved the prestige that the life of the shepherds and goats herders achieved. There also developed, where there was enough concentrated population, there developed states. The most important state was Sheba, or Saba, or Yemen down here, and in fact, archaeologists have a heyday down there, because the civilization down in Yemen is very strong, and that was reinforced, by the way, because very early they learned to build ships that could follow the coast of Arabia and get to India. So now from India came another thing that came through Sheba. I love it. It's my substitute for sugar. Cinnamon. Do you like cinnamon? Cinnamon. Oh, yes. Cinnamon, which became a very important spice, was now brought through Sheba. The Arabs would never tell the Europeans where it came from. They said it came from Arabia, but it was really coming from India, shipped from India to Sheba, and from Sheba, so there's a frankincense, there's cinnamon, and then from the Greek and Roman worlds and Persian worlds, other goods are coming down. So now you have, by the 5th or 6th century, a kind of developing economy. In addition, before Islam, the Arabs began to expand. Their population increased, and the desert couldn't contain them. So already, Arabia sort of expanded. It expanded into what in Israel is called the Negev, the south. There lived a people there who were called by the Romans the Nabateans. But the Nabatean isn't the name they use. I mean, they were Arabs. Their language was Arab, and when you go in Jordan to see the archaeological ruins of their capital, Petra, that was an Arab state and an Arab capital. And in addition, the Arabs moved up into the Fertile Crescent. They settled in what today is southern Iraq, and they also settled in eastern Syria. One of the great cities on the edge of the Roman Empire was the city of the palms, Tamar, but which is called in Latin Palmyra, Palm, P-A-L-M-Y-R, like Palmyra, all right, like Palmyra, New York, all right? So the Arabs expanded. And in addition, they developed this trade not only with India, and this was before Muhammad. They also developed trade with a rising kingdom across in Africa. That kingdom is Ethiopia, which ultimately was to be converted, missionaries coming down from Egypt to Christianity. And from Ethiopia, Christian missionaries would cross over into Yemen, and in fact, large numbers of people in Yemen were converted to Christianity before Muhammad. So Christianity was known in the peninsula, not only Christianity, but since many Jews were engaged in trade, there were thousands of Jews who went up and down. It's like I-95. It went up and down, up and down, up and down this road, and along the way, they converted some of the Arab tribes to Judaism. We know about that because Muhammad speaks of it in the Quran. What I'm saying is, it was developing a very small, all right, but thriving commercial sector. So it wasn't true that all Arabs were Bedouin. Even before Muhammad's time, there was developing this other thing. But then came Islam. And Muhammad wasn't a Bedouin. Muhammad was a city boy. He lived in Mecca. And in fact, he was a manager of caravans. And out of his new religion, which was given the name Islam, there came something that had not happened before. At that time, virtually all the Arabs of the world lived in Arabia. That's their home. But they were divided up into dozens and dozens and dozens of tribes that feuded with each other all the time, fighting in particular over water holes. The thing that Muhammad did from the Arab point of view, that's very important. We understand the new religion. But from the Arab point of view, what he did, he united all the Arabs. Before he died, all the Arabs of Arabia were united under his standard because, and this is very important to understand, the Bible of Islam is the Quran. The Quran was written in, basically, Arabia. It reflects the culture of the people in Arabia. They contain the speeches of Muhammad, which are what he proposes to be the revelations of Allah, the one and only God. And the lifestyle he talks about, the customs that are presented as the will of God, are the customs generally of the people who live in Arabia. In fact, the religion of the Arab people before Muhammad featured many spirits and many gods which were worshipped. But it didn't feature on the whole much sculpture. Very much a part of what we call the starkness of living in the desert was that the symbols of the gods of divine power were stones. And still today, the most sacred object in the Muslim world, which is in Mecca, is a huge stone. So the Quran reflects the Bedouin culture, which is to be found in Arabia. And the other thing, which of course helped to unify the peninsula, was that Muhammad organized an army, and there arose the principle of jihad, which was that people are offered the choice of conversion or death. Now that principle was to be repudiated later on in the world of Islam. Once they conquered all those Zoroastrians and all those Christians and whatever else it was, this principle no longer applied. A principle of toleration was established. But in Muhammad's day, in the peninsula of Arabia, that was the principle. And in fact, all other religions, whatever they were, Christian or Jewish, were eliminated. And the Arab tribes were all what? Unified. So the Arab nation was unified under Muhammad, and then unified and fired up by this new religion. They then went out from Arabia to conquer the other regions of the Arab and the Muslim world. Now, from the beginning, once Islam proved to be a great success, it happens in Detroit. And you start business in Detroit, and then you become very, very successful. Motown. Is that loyalty? You moved where? To Los Angeles. You moved your headquarters because, I mean, you're going to function in that entertainment world in Detroit? Never. So now the Arabs go out and they conquer this huge empire. Well, now that they have this huge empire, is Arabia the best place to have the center of the whole enterprise? The answer is no. So very early, Arabia is abandoned by the central government and by thousands and thousands of Arabs who now move elsewhere. Medina is only the capital for a short period of time, and then the Arabs realize they can't govern this empire from Butte, Montana. So they shift the capital to Damascus, and then they shift the capital to Baghdad. That wasn't original Arab territory, right? So now Medina shrinks into an insignificant little town. It's basically what we call abandonment. The second problem was that very early in Arab history, the Muslim religion splits in two. The majority are called Sunnis, we know that now, and the minority are called Shiites, like Catholics and what? And Protestants. And in the 9th century, the Shiites take over in Yemen. They're not very far from Mecca, by the way. So now, instead of simply having a united Muslim front in Arabia, it's divided. Most of Arabia is Sunni, but Yemen is Shiite. The third provocation is that once you conquer this empire, it's hard to keep the Arabs at home. They just pick up. Sometimes whole tribes moved. Whole tribes would move all the way across North Africa to Morocco, or all the way across North Africa to Algeria. They would just move. And in fact, Arabia became depopulated. People just left. So the success of the Arab nation meant for a while the failure of Arabia. One of the problems, of course, was what happened when the Arabs made their way to Egypt and to Iraq, places where there were long advanced civilizations. Well, they became far more sophisticated. And having become far more sophisticated, they now fell into a disagreement. The Arab conservatives were those who lived in Arabia. They were still working with what? Sheep and goats and, do you understand? The old faith. And now you've got Arabs living in Baghdad. Well, the Arabs in Baghdad are having a good time. They're doing the Arabian Nights. No. And they're much more tolerant and much more open to new ideas. And for women also, things are sometimes made more liberal. But back in Arabia, they don't understand this at all. They're living back on the farm, on the ranch, whatever it be. and this is to create disputes. The Arabs in Arabia, and this is part of the history of Arabia, remain the center of fundamentalism. Because that's where the religion began, and that's where the lifestyle that started the religion remains unchanged. Well, the response to all of this change on the part of the Arabs who remain in Arabia is the following. The one thing the Arabs in Arabia have for them, otherwise the thing, they would have pulled the plug and the whole thing what? They'd all gone. What's the one thing they have? One of the basic rules of Islam is that at least once in your life you what? You make a pilgrimage to Mecca. So you've got to get down to this city in the middle of a desert. If there was any revenue beyond sheep and goats in Arabia, got it? The only other revenue was, we would call it tourism today. In those days it was called pilgrimages. People went there to Mecca. And so that's what kept Arabia in the public mind. Even though it was like West Virginia in the Arab world, it was still the place that everybody, hopefully, at least once in their lifetime, would go to for this religious pilgrimage. But the main response in Arabia, and this is the recurring thread, the Arabs in Arabia, the homeland, rejected the new sophistication of Arabs in other places. They became the place where what? The old lifestyle was maintained. And in fact, there are many movements that arose in Arabia that were protest movements against what the caliphs in Baghdad or in Damascus tried to do. Along the way, Arabia was conquered by non-Arabs. The people who conquered them were Muslims, but they weren't Arabs and they didn't like Arabs. They're called Turks. They conquered the Arab Empire, they became Muslims. And then they ended up taking Arabia. There are two great Turkish periods of time. The first in the 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th century were the Turks who conquered Egypt. They're called the Mamelukes. They came and they conquered Arabia. And then in the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, and the beginning of the 20th century came the Ottoman Turks who were settled in Turkey or Istanbul. Now the Turks, when they converted to Islam, found fundamentalist Islam too severe. They don't like it. The thing the Turks liked, and it's related to the religion they had to begin with, is something that we call Sufism. Have you heard of Sufis? S-U-F-I-S. Let me tell you about Sufis. So, all right. The Turks used to have as their clergy people who were called, we call them shamans. They would speak to the gods and speak to the spirits of the dead. They would whirl around and go into trances. Today we use the word mysticism, right? Okay. Now that is strictly forbidden in the Quran and in conservative Islam. In Central Arabia, somebody whirling around to fall into a trance, do you understand? Whatever, a whirling dervish would be absolutely, totally unacceptable. So the Turks now come into Arabia and they bring with them their Sufis. Now that's going to be like a provocation. It's Islam, but it's not kosher Islam. Something has been added that the Arabs in Arabia don't think is proper. And this only reinforces the resentment and the rage. The Arabs in Arabia believe they are the pure Muslims. And they have been rejected, and all these people are coming in and what? Taking over their place and changing the religion and the whole bit, and they don't like it. So the Turks' arrival was provocative, but in the long run, it was going to produce something that would help revive Arabia. In the 18th century, there was a sheikh, a Muslim clergyman in Arabia, who hated Sufis and hated Turks. His name was Abdullah ibn Wahhab. And he founded a movement which is at the heart of Osama bin Laden's group. The movement is named after him. It is called the Wahhabi movement. And the Wahhabi movement says we've got to go back to the what? The original, the pure Islam. No dervishes whirling. No women showing off what? Anything. No books other than the Quran or the what? The sacred word. You got it. Better not catch you reading anything other than that. And only what the Quran and the old tradition teach. That's it. And Wahhabi, of course, now proclaimed the principle of jihad, which you can find in the Quran, which is, we will now go out all over Arabia, and if we find anybody misbehaving, they'll be offered a choice. I'll give you the two choices. Repent or die. Got those two choices? All right. With those two options, you got a lot. All right. So, and in fact, the Wahhabis did, and the reason why they were able to do that was that he was befriended by a down-and-out warrior family who lived nearby. The name of the family is the Saudis. It's the 18th century. And the Saudis and the Wahhabis what? Made a deal, and now the Saudis lead the Wahhabis on a rampage through Arabia. The Turks are losing their power, so they cannot stop it. And in fact, the Wahhabis capture Mecca, and they purify it. If they find a Sufi, they what? Well, it looks now as though somebody is going to unite the homeland, Arabia, under the pure original religion. Well, in Egypt, which was under Turkish control, there was a man who was the ancestor of King Farouk. Remember King Farouk? Not the same size. Okay. And his name was Muhammad Ali, and the Sultan in Istanbul sent him a message saying, Muhammad, you got to do something. You got to. Mecca is in the hands of these crazies. So Muhammad Ali took an army and his son Ibrahim, and they entered from Egypt. They came way down here, and they took Mecca back. And then they harassed and pounded the Saudis, who then withdrew into the center of Arabia, into the interior where it was very hard to get to them because it was in the middle of the desert. So the Saudis lost, the Wahhabis lost, and the Turks are back. But it's not for long. The Wahhabis remain. If you want to find them, they're around a city which is now one of the capitals of Saudi Arabia, which was a dump. It's called Riyadh. That's where they were. And now, what will change the picture is Peter O'Toole. See him in Troy as King Priam? He's very, I'm telling you. Go see it. It's the return of Peter O'Toole. He's very, very good. All right, so Peter O'Toole is also Lawrence of Arabia. So now the Turks are going to be disposed of because there's a war called the First World War, and now the British arrive. And they now contact the Arab who has been placed by the Turks in charge of Mecca. His name is Hussein. And they say, we know you really don't like the Turks. If you'll help us, we'll make you or your sons the kings of the Arabs. Oh, well. So he joins them, and we all know what happens. Jose Ferrar is sent by Istanbul, the whole thing. In the end, the Turks are defeated. The Ottomans, right, withdraw. And now Hussein says, I'm the king of the Arabs. Once the Turks are out, the Wahhabis now reorganize. The leader of the Wahhabis, the leader of the Saudis now, is a man we all remember. He was called Ibn Saud. And Ibn Saud, Abdul Aziz Ibn Saud, is a great warrior. And he now mobilizes his army. The Turks are gone. Hussein is weak. And he now comes out of the middle of Arabia, out of the middle of the desert. And he lands on Mecca, and in 1924, he takes it. And having taken it, he then takes his army because there's now no resistance. There's no military force in all of Arabia strong enough to stop him. The only force that could stop him would be if the British would be willing to send in a force, but after World War I, they're exhausted. So he takes most of Arabia. All he doesn't take are two things. He doesn't take Yemen. Yemen has its own ruler. He is a Shiite prince, sultan. And although the economy in Yemen is no longer frankincense and cinnamon, all right, it's more like sheep and goats now, and some other things, a few grains. He doesn't take Yemen, and what else he doesn't take is the part of Arabia controlled by the British. So let me tell you, in the 19th century, the overwhelming concern of the British was not petroleum, it was before petroleum. The overwhelming concern of the British is India, protecting the route to India, and especially after the 1880s when the British acquired control of the Suez Canal, because otherwise the route to India is what? All the way around Africa. So now it's the Suez Canal. So if British ships are coming through the Suez Canal and the British have seized Egypt and taken it from the Turks, and now you come right down the Red Sea, well, you're passing along the coast of Arabia. Here's a narrow opening in Yemen. And right there at the narrow opening there was a port. It's called Aden, A-D-E-N. The British take it. Be in British hands. So you can't take Aden. And then along the coast, the British seize all of this because it's on the way to India and all around into the Persian Gulf. So what today are the states of Oman, the Emirates, Qatar, and Bahrain were in the hands of the British. And Ibn Saud was not in any way, shape, and form prepared to fight the British Empire. So that's the part of Arabia he didn't take. And that was to remain actually under British control until 1971. Now, the Saudis have one source of revenue. It's Mecca. Right? They're sheep. No, I forgot. Sheep, goats, sheep. Right. But outside of sheep and goats, all you've got is Mecca. And in fact, I want to tell you, after 1924, if you went to Mecca, no Sufi shtick, no Sufi stuff. Do you understand? This was now in the hands of the fundamentalists. You had to behave in the way Islam was in the beginning, before it was changed by all these sophisticates in other places. And then, one day, close to the beginning of World War II, along the Persian Gulf, they discovered in Saudi Arabia, and that's not too far from where in Iran they had already discovered petroleum, oil. And not too far from where they had discovered petroleum in Iraq. They discover this enormous, do you understand, reservoir of petroleum, one of the greatest places for petroleum in the whole world, and on the territory controlled by the Saudis. Do the Saudis have an oil engineer? Do they know how to extract the oil from below? No. But it's their territory. Ibn Saud doesn't like the British because the British, you see, control part of Arabia. So he does something in the middle of the First World War that is going to be part of the politics of Arabia, and to bring another nation there. That's us. He's contacted by the Americans, who now want to have access to the oil in the Middle East. And instead of yielding to the British, who control almost everything, together with the Dutch, he yields to the Americans because he wants their support against the British. And in fact, an alliance is made, and now the Americans come into Arabia. Now you have to understand what this means. You're from New York, Philadelphia. No. You're arriving in this place which is run by Muslim fundamentalists. There is a company called Aramco, which is created, which basically controls the oil fields and will be in charge of exploiting the oil, the profits of which are now going to change the whole fortunes of Arabia. Islam changed the economy of Arabia by bringing tourists, right? Pilgrims. But petroleum is to overwhelmingly transform this place which was the backwater. I don't want to talk about this. Which was the backwater of the Muslim world. The homeland, but the what? West Virginia is now transformed. And you can see the transformation that has taken place because of petroleum wealth over the years, going all the way back to the end of World War II. If you go to Riyadh now, Riyadh is in the middle of a terrible desert. Do you understand? It's in the middle of a terrible desert. But now the Saudis have the kind of money that you have in Arizona and California. If you have that kind of money, you can do anything to a desert, right? Fountains, grass, and whatever you want. So now when you go to Riyadh, you will see shopping centers there that make Somerset Mall look like nothing. You will see skyscrapers in Riyadh. Do you see what's happening here? And already you can see the problem. You have skyscrapers, gorgeous new skyscrapers. I mean, you can't believe what is there. And ultimately, they will find oil in the British sectors. They find some oil in Oman. They find some oil in what was called the Pirate Coast and then the Trucial Coast, and then it got the name the United Arab Emirates. Abu Dhabi, you go there. I mean, Dubai, I mean, you just go there. I mean, you can't believe. Streets made out of marble and glass. From sheep dung. I mean, the splendor of it in terms of what we call an urban industrial, all the amenities of an urban industrial civilization, elevators, escalators, do you understand, parking facilities, I mean, the whole thing, it's there. And it's happened over the last 50 years, the total transformation of this Bedouin backwater. Well, now I do want to tell you that the fact that Arabia had oil presented a problem for the Saudis with regard to other Arab nations. Because starting in 1953, there appeared in Egypt, the largest Arab country, and Egypt was very poor and without oil. A man called Gamal Abdel Nasser. And he needs money. He makes an alliance with the Russians. Go get money from the Russians. What are you going to do with borscht in Cairo? I don't know. So he needs money. And now Nasser is a modernist. He's one of those Arabs who says what we need is an urban, do you understand, industrial civilization. What we need is scientific education. We've got to change the Arab people, otherwise we'll always be poor and disunited. So he has a whole campaign. What he doesn't have is money. What Saudi Arabia has, a backward clergy, but what? They got money. So now he basically invades Arabia. He arranges for the overthrow of the conservative Shiite government in Yemen and places a radical military officer in charge. And then he sends the Egyptian army into Yemen. Well, they're arriving in Arabia. They're right on the borders here, do you understand, Saudi Arabia. And then he tries to infiltrate the country. The Saudis are frightened. But in the end, they don't have to worry because you remember what happened to Nasser. And then when after Nasser goes in 1967, there are a bunch of Arab radicals stirred up by the Israeli victory in the Six-Day War. They're in Lebanon somewhere. One of them is a man called Khabash, and he turns out to be a Marxist. And he sends a group of Arab Marxist intellectuals into Arabia, just what they need. And this was one of the most bizarre chapters in the history of this place. They move into Aden, the British colony. And when Aden becomes independent, it is called South Yemen. And in fact, they take over the government. The next thing they do is they order women to remove their veils. They take education away from the clergy, the whole thing. I mean, it's one of the most radical governments in the Arab world, and they're in the middle of Arabia. I mean, it's like crazy. But they don't last very long for obvious what? For obvious reasons. So now we come to the problem. And this is the most important thing. Here is the homeland of the Arab people, which for most of its history was an economic backwater, and which for most of its history was the center of Muslim fundamentalism. And now it's filled with all the accoutrements of modern Western civilization. So, how do you feel about it? Well, the moment you've got cars, do you understand? And money to take trips, the next thing you do if you're a rich woman is, when you're out on the street, you keep your veil on, do you understand the whole thing? Once you get home, lock the door. Into the bikini. Got it? Out with the booze. No, because that's what the consumer culture ultimately is so powerful, it's transforming. And what's very clear is that hundreds and thousands of Arabs in Arabia, which used to be the homeland of the Wahhabis, are now secretly, or not so secretly, living Western lifestyles. So that is to trigger Osama bin Laden. There are all these clergy, all right, do you understand? And they get up and give speeches, and the good thing about being a clergyman in Saudi Arabia, in the mosque, see, if you're a clergyman in a main line Protestant church in North America, in New York, on a Sunday morning, you may have a terrific speech, but there are 5 people. But in any mosque in Saudi Arabia, everybody, what? Everybody goes, and they're all there, and you get up and you now denounce the wickedness of this new culture and the wickedness of this government, the Saudi family, which had been the friends of Islam, but are now the what? The enemies. Arabia has turned into this incredible place where on the one hand you can find sheep, do you understand? Sheep and goats and Bedouin and the most conservative lifestyle, and simultaneously, once the door is locked, do you understand? You can find some of the most incredible aspects of what we call the consumer culture, or you can simply go to the shopping centers. Now, what does that mean for Arabia? What does it mean for the homeland of the Arab nation to have, this isn't just slight differences. We don't have those contrasts in America. We have, I want to tell you, the religious right in America, I see them, they got their skirts up to here. They do. And they got all the makeup on, do you understand? And they go to all the movies, and they go to all the shopping centers and whatever else. Religious right basically means that they go to church every Sunday and they may send their children to a Christian school, do you understand? But their lifestyle is not very different from this. But in Arabia, on the one hand, do you understand, you've got the consumer culture pushing, and on the other hand, it's the time of Muhammad, and they're all next to each other. So the question is, what's going to happen, and what does it mean? Come back in 5 minutes, and I'll try to tell you. Militant fundamentalism is growing in the Arabian Peninsula. And it's growing in particular in response to what's going on there. The first is that although the government says it's opposed to secularization, once you enter into an urban industrial civilization, once you enter into its consumer culture, there's no going back. And so, all the new artifacts, all the new skyscrapers, all the new shopping centers, whatever it be, radically change the character of Arabian life. I mean, you can say it won't make any difference, and that's what the government does. It does make a difference. The second is that even if you're not overwhelmingly opposed to the westernization, you may still sympathize with the fundamentalists, because the fundamentalists hate the royal house. They view the Saudis as traitors. They who had championed the Wahhabi movement have now betrayed it, living the high life, spending their money. Who knows what goes on behind the closed doors, aren't we? And thousands of Saudi princes all living off the public largesse. So if you hate the corruption of the Saudi family, even though you may not be so fundamentalist, the only successful group that can overthrow them are the what? Are the fundamentalists. So you support them. It happened in Poland under the communists. Many young people who weren't religious went to Catholic Church. The reason they did that was because the only force in Poland that offered any kind of effective resistance to the communists were the Catholics. And so, and once the communists fell, then many of these people just stopped going. So here is another reason for supporting the fundamentalists. You may not be a fundamentalist, but you hate the corruption of this family. The third provocation is you have to understand that almost from the very beginning, all foreigners, all non-Muslims were eliminated from Arabia. No foreigner, no non-Muslim is allowed. I mean, you can disguise yourself, I mean, whatever. It's pretty risky. But the alliance with the Americans brought foreigners. You needed oil engineers, didn't you, to come in? And they needed their families. So now you're building compounds for American families. They're shopping, aren't they? They're in the shopping centers. And the women, I mean, they're supposed to be covered, but, you know, they're not covered the way they should be covered. So it's a provocation. And in fact, the fundamentalists make a great deal out of this. The Saudi government and the United Arab Emirates government and the Omani government, they have brought foreigners into this country. And according to the Wahhabi movement, no foreigners in Arabia. It is the homeland of the Arab people. It is the homeland of Islam. And the worst of it was in the Gulf War. All those American troops that showed up in Arabia, it was a provocation. Yes, we don't like Saddam Hussein. He's a modernist. We hate him. And we don't like the fact he's in Kuwait. But on the other hand, he's sticking his tongue out at the Americans and, well, he's not a foreigner. The fourth, of course, is the whole issue of Zionism and America. The chief ally of the Saudis, as of Qatar and Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates and Oman, is the United States of America. And the United States of America is also the chief supporter of the most provocative state in the Muslim world, Israel. So our king can say how much he loves Islam, Allah, the whole thing. I mean, he's consorting with the enemy. So the Zionist issue has made the alliance with America a very problematic thing for these people. They hate America for two reasons. America is responsible for the culture that is undermining the Wahhabi faith. And two, America is the nation that supports and sustains Israel. Do you need more? And something new. Osama bin Laden comes from a Yemeni family. The family started in Yemen. And they were poor. And the bin Ladens moved across the border to Saudi Arabia. And there, they got into the construction business. The construction business, pretty good business in Saudi Arabia, do you understand? I mean, and gift here, a little gift there, whatever else it is. It's the same in other parts of the world too, sometimes even in America, believe it or not, all right? No. So they get into the construction business and they become these billionaires. Shopping centers, pores, whatever, building. And to the great builder is born a son. His name, Osama. And we all know from the 60s what happens to the children of the rich. Do you remember? They come to hate their parents. And they have a lot of free time to do it because their tuition is paid. No. No, but do you remember the 60s? I mean, there's a perfect 60s story. Yes, his family is religious. But on the other hand, they go to the Riviera, they go to Paris. I mean, you understand. And so his act of rebellion, which is reinforced by what is going on in Afghanistan with the Russians, takes him to Afghanistan. But he doesn't have to go to Afghanistan. All he has to do is to go to a mosque in Saudi Arabia. I mean, you don't have to go to Afghanistan to find the Wahhabis. The home of the Wahhabis is here. And he becomes a fanatic, politicized, Muslim fundamentalist, committed to jihad, to war. And that is to drive all the foreigners out of the Muslim world and the Arab world. Well, if you are on his side, then what happened in New York on September the 11th, 2001, I mean, this is an organization going somewhere. Huh? And even though the overwhelming power of the American army and its allies crushed the Taliban in Afghanistan, there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people all over the Muslim world who think he's the cat's meow. And that's true in Saudi Arabia. He's Saudi. I mean, he's Yemeni, but it's the same peninsula. It's Arabia. And he is a perfect product of Arabian Wahhabi Islam. That's what he preaches. And so there are people all over Saudi Arabia, it doesn't make the royal family very comfortable, that like him and support him. Now, you can't do it openly because the Saudi government would arrest you. But you can get away with it. On any given day in Saudi Arabia, there are imams getting up, or sheikhs getting up in the mosques, saying things which, quite frankly, are not kosher from the Saudi point of view, the government point of view. Policing it is very, very difficult, and one of the reasons why it's difficult is if you try to arrest these people, there will be mobs opposing you. And the last thing you want is some kind of a confrontation which is being photographed, you understand, or filmed, in which thousands of people are trying to defend a sheikh because he's being arrested. Never. Now, in Saudi Arabia, there is also a liberalism. I mean, you can't have all that change and all that consumer culture. In the Arab world is loaded with modernists. Gamal Abdel Nasser was a modernist. Saddam Hussein was a ruthless rotten modernist, but he was what? He was a modernist. He hated fundamentalists. So there are lots of modernists, and now in places like Riyadh or Jeddah, Jeddah is the main port of Mecca. Foreigners can come to Jeddah, but they can't go to Mecca. Mecca is just a few miles to the east of Jeddah. So in places like that, you've got young Saudis, men and women, who would like to see some change. What they basically want. I mean, the idea of a democratic tradition isn't strong in the Muslim world. It wasn't strong anywhere in the world. And in fact, democracy may not be what they want. I'll tell you what. If you institute democracy in Saudi Arabia and you put women's rights up for a vote, you understand? You'll lose. The overwhelming majority of the people will democratically elect those people that will keep women under bushel baskets. You see, I didn't object when the army in Turkey overthrew a democratically elected government, because the democratically elected government was prepared to suppress personal freedom. And the army intervened so that women's freedom could be preserved, right? I mean, the whole thing. So it's one of those ironies. It isn't true that democracy and personal freedom go together. They do in an advanced, well-educated, middle-class society. They don't in the Muslim world. So what you really want is a government that will grant personal freedom even though all the imams are screaming against it. Oh. So they'd like maybe the Saudis, who do it behind the door, to publicly allow a little more personal freedom for men and for women, in particular the terrible restrictions on women who can't drive cars, who in many cases can't pursue educational projects that are available to men. I mean, shut up. They want more personal freedom. And the liberalism is encouraged by something now that has entered into Arab life. The Saudis can't keep it away. The media. So now you got this jazzy new TV station called Al Jazeera. And Al Jazeera is run by modernists. Do you understand? In Qatar, and the programs they've got, the women they show, I mean, the whole thing. I mean, TV as an educational tool is overwhelming in the world. People see how the other half, or the other 7/8 or whatever, or the other 1/8 live, whatever it be, it's an educational tool. And in fact, there has been an easing in Arabia in certain places. In Kuwait, they now have a parliament. Oh. And they're talking about women's votes. In Qatar, where you got the jazzy TV station, which we're not crazy about because it seems to broadcast Usama propaganda on occasion, although the people who run the station aren't living Usama-type lives, all right? There, they gave women the vote. So there are whole areas where you've got fundamentalists, and then you have other little areas where there is an easing. So now you've got this tension, and wherever there's easing, that only increases the intense fanaticism of those who are opposed to change. Now, what are the realities now in Arabia? One, there is an overwhelming presence of fundamentalism. That is, if you were to take a vote, got it? If you had democracy in Saudi Arabia, you're not getting the U.S. Constitution. In fact, the majority of the people in Saudi Arabia might vote to keep out all foreigners. It's one of the dilemmas. We use this word democracy. For me, the issue is personal, it's personal freedom. It's rights, it's individual rights. The second is that the Saudi royal family is very vulnerable. All right? You know, on the one hand, they're rich and they have all this money and they have, I mean, do you understand how many members of this family are on the public payroll? I mean, there's several thousand receiving huge stipends from the state simply because they are related, because in that kind of a world, nice guy, a good guy, takes care of his family, doesn't he? The Americans are vulnerable. One of the reasons for the invasion of Iraq is that the United States wanted to shift its military presence from Saudi Arabia, which is fundamentalist, to a country which is fairly secular. Ha ha. I mean, that was one of the reasons, to shift the base, because Saudi Arabia is becoming increasingly more uncomfortable for American troops. So the place to put the American military presence was not in Arabia, but in Iraq, which is more modernist and more secular. There's terrorism going on. You keep reading it from time to time. They're blowing up places, housing developments. There were 2 major bombings in Riyadh alone. So that now means you as an American or a foreigner European foreigner used to live in a compound that was protected by a wall, but now it's not protected. Who knows, somebody driving into the compound, gets through the gate, is carrying a little satchel, I don't know, and there's a bomb. Reality. Saudi Arabia is a terrorist base in the sense that, given the nature of its population, a lot of the people who end up in Al-Qaeda have come from, like Osama bin Laden, have come from Saudi Arabia. They may have trained militarily in Afghanistan, and they may be working in Morocco, whatever else it is. It is a base for recruitment. And it is the base for Muslim fundamentalism in the Arab world. There is no other place in the Arab world where the population as a whole is more fundamentalist. And that's in the presence, do you understand, of the skyscrapers and the shopping center. That's the irony of this all. The clergy in Saudi Arabia is overwhelmingly powerful. It intimidates the Saudi royal family. And the way the Saudi royal family handles it, and this is the irony of it, they give huge subsidies to the schools in Saudi Arabia that train the clergy in Saudi Arabia and all over the world, who train the people who denounce the Saudi royal family. Because that's the bribe, do you understand? The bribe for stability. Most of what I call a crazy religious fanatic clergy in the Muslim world, a good part of it receives Saudi subsidies. And in fact, it was the Saudis who kept arranging for money to be sent to the Taliban in Afghanistan. It was like an act of suicide. But there's something called long-run survival and short-run survival. For their long-run survival, it's what? Bad. For their short-run survival? No, yeah, you give them a bribe, give them some money. I mean, get off our backs. One of the realities is that there are liberals, very softly, protesting in Arabia. They protested in Qatar, and they got the vote for women, do you understand? They protested in Kuwait, and they got a parliament. In Saudi Arabia so far, they've got virtually nothing. The government hasn't yielded. It's afraid of the clergy. Well, what are the implications of this in terms of the future? First, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, United Arab Emirates, it doesn't make any difference. The homeland of the Arab people remains the base of fundamentalism in the Arab world. There's no doubt about it. And in fact, large numbers of people who will end up in these terrorist organizations will have come out of Saudi Arabia, or Yemen, which have experienced, certainly in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, have experienced a lot of what we call westernization. The second is that this is the irony. If you want to take people in the Arab world to a place where they can see the finest of Western technology, I would go to Abu Dhabi. That's what I would do. You get off the boat, the tourists do, and you're walking down a street, marble, glass, glass, marble, marble, glass, air conditioning, right? All the women are walking around all covered up. The contrasts are so overwhelming. They're absurd. But they're there. One of the implications is that the Saudi royal family needs the Americans to stay in power, and the Americans need the Saudis to hang on to the oil. Got it? We may think they're the worst bunch of crooks in the world. Sorry. We ain't got another, we don't have another choice. There isn't another group, because if we cooperate to overthrow them, we've got the fundamentalists. Now, that was the big dilemma in the Carter administration with regard to the Shah. Was the Shah a wonderful ruler? Please. I mean, the crown didn't even fit his head. It was down on his chin. Was he a better alternative to Ayatollah Khomeini? Got the dilemmas in life? We all have them, right? Is life fair? Sometimes the choices we have, you know. Where do you want to live? Ishpeming or Marquette? Okay, all right. No. I have a friend who had to make that choice. So. No, it's all right. Okay, now, the other thing is, and it's there is this internal tension. It isn't that the whole country is fundamentalist. There are thousands and thousands of people here who would like to see more personal freedom. There is no doubt about that. And that does create tension. They certainly don't have political power, and the Saudi government is afraid to indulge them for fear of angering the powerful fundamentalist clergy. So, but there's this tension. I mean, you can't live in a country where you close the door and people suddenly strip. I mean, it's bound to create some kind of internal tension. All right. And the last, the most provocative issue in the Muslim world is the Israeli-Palestinian issue. And in fact, the longer the war goes on, the better it is for the fundamentalists. The worst thing for the fundamentalists would be to have some kind of peace or some level of diminishing the hostility. But for the Saudi rulers, who have given all this money to all these fundamentalists who oppose the peace, it's very clear to them they now have a vested interest in seeing some arrangements, because if they want to stay in power with all their corruption, then they have to diminish the power of the fundamentalist clergy. One of the ways to do that is to encourage the peace process. And in fact, in the last few years, the Saudi royal family, not the clergy, the Saudi royal family has been much more supportive of the peace process, whatever it be, than they had been before. Before, it was total rejection. When you had Ibn Saud, King Faisal, King Khalid. Now we've got King Fahd, but he can't function. So the heir apparent Crown Prince Abdullah is now the functioning ruler. So yes, let me say, as we go through the adventure of looking at the whole Arab world, the whole picture, this is a part of the Arab world of absolute stark contrasts. Do you understand? The starkest contrast of all. The home base of Muslim fundamentalism, got it? Next door to Gucci Poochie. Bizarre? Yes. True? Yes. And please join me for Egypt next week. Thank you all very, very much.